Hey guys, tonight we're wandering back through the corridors of Whitehall Palace, a place that at first glance gleams with candlelight and laughter, but hides a kind of exhaustion that no crown can cover. This is a story about the human body under royal pressure, about how even kings can rot from the inside out, while everyone around them insists that they look divine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to make this a little more personal, leave a comment with your location and local time. I always like seeing where you're listening from, scattered across the quiet corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a vast, dimly lit chamber that smells of beeswax and sleep deprivation. The fire in the hearth has long since burned low, leaving behind a dull red glow that throws strange shapes across the carved oak walls. This is Whitehall, the beating heart of a restored monarchy, and at its centre lies a man whose mind is still sharp enough to hold an empire together, but whose body has begun to betray him. King Charles II, the so-called Merry Monarch, the man who brought laughter and theatre and silk and scandal back to England, is awake again at 3 in the morning. His bed, wide enough to fit 3 courtiers and 2 hounds, feels like a battlefield. His pulse is uneven. His hands tremble when he reaches for the silver goblet by his bedside, and his thoughts, those quicksilver flashes of wit and charm, come slower now, sluggish as the thick medicines lining his bedside table. You can almost hear it, the faint scratch of the royal physician's quill, tallying every symptom, the swelling, the convulsions, the nosebleeds, the trembling tongue. There's a kind of superstition to the record-keeping, as if writing the king's decline could somehow delay it. Charles, for his part, laughs it off when the doctors arrive at dawn. He still wears humour like armour. Another day, another purge, he jokes, though the words catch on his dry tongue. His eyes are bright, not from life, but from fever. He's a man living on borrowed energy, his body running like a clock wound too tightly. The palace at this hour is eerily still. The courtiers have long gone to bed, their powdered wigs resting like discarded masks on vanities, but the hum of alchemy never stops. In a small chamber just below the kings, glass retorts and copper alembics bubble quietly as mercury fumes snake through the air. The royal apothecary, kneeling beside a table of flasks, murmurs to himself in the language of experiment. He believes, as his master does, that nature can be coaxed into revealing her secrets if you only apply enough curiosity or enough chemicals. Charles adores this world of strange science. He collects philosophers like others collect paintings. He keeps telescopes, magnets, and preserved fetuses in jars. He can spend an entire evening discussing the circulation of the blood with the same delight others reserve for music. But it's this fascination, this hunger to understand, that slowly begins to poison him. The irony is that the man who loves life most is being undone by his own pursuit of it. You can picture the scene, a king in silk nightclothes, sitting by candlelight, reading a Latin treatise on Mercury, while his fingers shake too much to turn the page. He believes sincerely that progress is divine, that to study the human body is to honor God's design. He has his own distillery of medicines, his own lab, even his own personal stock of alchemical powders. The physicians nod along, pleased to have a patron who understands their importance, and so they indulge him. They bleed him when he feels dizzy. They dose him with antimony to purify the system. They smear mercury paste on his temples to draw out the heat. By modern standards, it's a horror show dressed in lace. But to them, it's the height of medical sophistication. Every man of learning has his own theory about what's killing the king. Bad humours, black bile, excess blood, divine punishment. But they all agree on one thing: he must be drained, balanced, and renewed. In the early mornings, when the city outside Whitehall is still wrapped in fog, you can hear the sounds of London's other patients echoing through the narrow streets, the coughing of plague survivors, the rattle of carriages carrying bodies to churchyards, the street vendors hawking miracle elixirs brewed from wine, wormwood, and desperation. The city mirrors its king, glamorous on the surface, rotting underneath. Inside the palace, Charles forces himself through his royal duties. He signs papers, receives ambassadors, plays chess with courtiers who pretend not to notice his trembling hands. His once dark hair, now streaked with grey, is powdered and perfumed to hide the sour smell of sickness. There's something strangely theatrical about it all, as if the monarchy itself were performing the idea of health. Even the candles seem to burn too brightly, trying to compensate for the dimming man at the centre of the stage. And yet, there are moments of tenderness amid the decay. His dogs still sleep at his feet. His mistresses still visit, whispering sweet nothings that blend with the rustle of silk. He still laughs, genuinely, sometimes, though the sound comes with a rasp now. You can almost believe for a heartbeat that the merry monarch still lives up to his name, but the court knows, the servants know, even the walls seem to lean closer, listening for the next cough. It's a peculiar kind of tension, the waiting for decline. Every servant becomes a witness, every physician a gambler. They whisper to each other in corridors about the swelling of his feet, the greyness under his eyes, the strange metallic smell that clings to his breath. Some say he's cursed for his indulgence. Others claim it's divine retribution. But the truth is simpler, crueler. The same fascination that made Charles II one of the most enlightened men of his age is now killing him, molecule by molecule. Outside, the city still celebrates him. London adores its king of pageantry, its smiling philosopher on the throne. The theatres are open, the taverns alive with laughter, the bells of St. Paul's ringing like a heartbeat. But inside Whitehall, behind the silken curtains and the portraits painted to freeze his youth, the air grows thick with the scent of medicine and candle grease. Somewhere in that darkness, a man who once ruled oceans now fears his own body. And tonight, as the clock chimes 4, you stand in that room with him, in spirit, if not in flesh, watching him stare into the mirror, his reflection trembling slightly in the candlelight. He leans closer, searching for the man he used to be. For a moment, you can almost imagine that the figure looking back is not Charles at all, but something else, something that has been waiting patiently inside him, wearing his face like a mask. The king smiles faintly, as if amused by the thought, and whispers a line he once said in jest. "I am an old man and have lived too long to be deceived by physicians." Then he laughs, that same bright human sound that once charmed an entire nation, and the laugh catches in his throat. Somewhere in the distance, the first birds begin to sing. Morning seeps through the shutters, pale and thin. The candles burn lower, and the king who brought back joy to England sits awake in his bed, feeling his pulse in his temples, wondering if it's the heartbeat of a man or the ticking of a clock slowly winding down. The morning begins with the sound of glass clinking, faint, deliberate, almost reverent. You stand once again in Whitehall, in the smaller of the king's chambers where sunlight has not yet found the courage to enter. A cluster of bottles rests on the table beside the royal bed, dark amber vials, brass-lidded jars, and small handwritten labels curling with age. The king's physicians move about like priests preparing a ritual, and in a sense that's what this is. The old religion of alchemy, performed on the most sacred object in the kingdom, the king's own body. Charles II, despite the tremor in his hands, insists on watching. He's fascinated by the process. The distillations, the tinctures, the thin silver spoons that tremble slightly as a pale liquid is poured. The royal chemist George Starkey claims that the formula comes from the teachings of the alchemist Sendivogius, a man who believed that mercury was the spirit of life hidden within all things. The king listens, nodding, intrigued by the poetry of it. You can see it in his eyes, that mixture of fear and wonder, the belief that science and faith might still be reconciled through the right potion. "So this," the king says softly, "is what keeps the soul tethered to the flesh." The physician bows, not daring to contradict him. The mixture gleams faintly blue in the light, swirling like a captured ghost. In truth, the dosage is far too much. But medicine in the 17th century walks a narrow line between experiment and execution. The doctors whisper theories about restoring balance to the humours, about cooling the blood or draining the bile, but what they're really doing is guessing with conviction. Every cure is a wager, and the king's body is the table. You watch as the first spoonful touches his lips. There's a metallic sheen left behind, faintly silvery, and the smell, sharp, medicinal, with the bitterness of vinegar and decay. Charles grimaces, then swallows again, forcing the second dose down. He insists he feels better. For a few minutes he does. His pulse steadies, his colour brightens, and he jokes about the philosophers who argued that mercury could preserve the soul. That's what makes this story so human and so tragic. The king isn't being deceived. He's complicit in his own undoing. The line between curiosity and destruction blurs when you're desperate to stay alive. By noon, the palace stirs to life. Servants bustle through the halls, polishing brass and sweeping ashes. The morning frost still lingers on the windows, and you can hear the city waking beyond the Thames, the church bells, the wheels of carriages, the echoing shouts from market stalls. The world outside continues, oblivious to the quiet unravelling of the man inside. Charles dresses with effort. The layers of silk and velvet weigh heavy on his shoulders. The periwig hides the thinning hair. The rouge covers the pallor. To his courtiers he's still the same monarch who danced at masquerades and rode through London's streets, smiling like a man who'd made peace with history. But beneath the perfumed veneer, his body hums with instability. His nerves twitch. His skin feels as if it's being polished from the inside. The mercury has begun its work. When he meets with the Royal Society that afternoon, the very group of thinkers he himself founded, his words flow like wine. He speaks of magnetism, of tides, of the strange beauty of chemical transmutation. To them he seems vibrant, even inspired. They cannot see the fine tremor at the edge of his glass when he raises it to toast discovery. They cannot smell the faint metallic tang of sickness that lingers beneath his lace collar. You might almost envy him. In this moment, the illusion of health can feel better than the truth of it. He's surrounded by men who believe the world is opening, not closing, who see science as salvation, not slow damnation. Their excitement fills the room like static. They speak of anatomy, of the new world of the invisible, where the microscope reveals God's smallest miracles. The king, always eager to belong to that conversation, promises funding for another experiment. He wants to understand the soul of fire, the breath of metals, the secret heat that animates the earth itself. And yet, when the meeting ends and the applause fades, he lingers by the window. He watches the grey clouds crawling over London and feels in his bones that same cold creeping inside him. It's the paradox of kingship, to be worshipped for your vitality while you feel yourself disintegrating cell by cell. Later that night, in private, his confessor arrives. The conversation is hushed, half in whispers, half in sighs. The priest urges him to repent, to stop chasing the hidden elements of God's world and return to simple faith. But Charles smiles the way only a man with too much intelligence can. If God did not want me to seek his secrets, he says, he would not have made them so fascinating. It's not arrogance, it's hunger. The same hunger that drives philosophers to madness and explorers off the edge of maps. You can almost admire it, that refusal to stop questioning, even as the questions eat him alive. The night grows long. Candles gutter. The physician returns, holding another flask, this one clear, shimmering faintly in the dark. A restorative tonic, he calls it, though the ingredients read like a confession. Mercury, antimony, wormwood, rosewater, and a pinch of powdered pearl. The king drinks again. His tongue burns, his heart races. For a moment the pain feels distant, almost holy. as if his suffering were proof that he's touching something divine. You think about how strange that is, that across centuries people have sought salvation in what slowly destroys them, that somewhere between faith and vanity lies a universal weakness, the desire to believe we can control decay. Charles drifts into a half-sleep, his pulse fluttering like a moth trapped under glass. He dreams of rivers of silver flowing through his veins, of light burning behind his eyes, of a world where death is simply another transformation. The alchemists used to say that the base metals of the earth could be purified through fire until they became gold. The king, lying there in the dim candlelight, believes or wants to believe that the same law applies to him. When he wakes, the candles have burned low. The clock reads a little past midnight. Somewhere in the palace, a servant drops a tray, and the sound shatters the quiet. The king sits up, sweat beading on his skin, his breath ragged. He looks down at his hands, once steady, now trembling uncontrollably, and for the first time he doesn't reach for another remedy. He just watches them, fascinated, terrified, as if they belong to someone else. The night feels heavy with meaning. The room smells faintly of metal and roses. Outside, the rain begins to fall, soft at first, then steady, and you realize something that no doctor, no alchemist, no philosopher could ever admit out loud. The king is not being cured, he's being gilded from within, layer by layer, until all that remains is the shine. The next morning, when you walk again through the halls of Whitehall, the air feels different, heavier somehow, as though the very walls have absorbed the fumes of medicine and fever. The servants move softly, their eyes downcast, each step a practiced silence. They have learned by now that even the faintest sound can send tremors through the royal temper, and in the great bedchamber lit by thin winter light, the King of England sits before a mirror. You can picture it clearly. A vast gilt mirror framed in carved cherubs, its glass mottled with time, the surface slightly warped, so that the man reflected within looks less like a monarch and more like an apparition. His face is pale, almost grey, the corners of his mouth trembling faintly, as if in quiet argument with himself. The mercury treatments have begun to mark him, though no one dares say it. His gums bleed. His breath carries that faint metallic scent that hangs in the air long after he speaks. And yet he keeps staring, not in vanity, but in curiosity, as though the man in the mirror might finally confess what his doctors cannot. The chamber is littered with evidence of royal desperation. Half-drained glasses of tinctures, folded handkerchiefs dark with blood, pages of notes written in the king's own hand, observations on temperature, sleep, appetite. It's a kind of self-experimentation, the same logic that drives natural philosophers to cut open frogs or stare at sunspots. The king is his own subject now, his body the final proof of his devotion to science. Behind him, the mirror reflects a blur of gold and crimson, the bed, the drapes, the royal insignia, all the trappings of absolute power, reduced now to decoration. He whispers something under his breath, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the reflection, a prayer maybe, or a curse. When the physicians arrive, they bow, as always. Their movements are ceremonial. The king doesn't look at them, he just points toward the tray of flasks on the table. The senior physician, Sir Edmund Scarburg, clears his throat and mutters something about balancing the humours again. They speak of the body as though it were a furnace, a thing to be stoked and cooled and drained in turn. Their confidence is rehearsed, their precision frightening. They have no understanding of what they're really doing, but their voices are full of certainty. They mix another dose. This one they call a cordial julep. Inside the liquid swirl powdered coral, gold leaf and mercury sublimates, a recipe meant to restore the king's vital spirits. When the spoon touches his lips, the metal catches the light, glinting like liquid sunlight. He drinks it all in 3 gulps. The courtiers applaud quietly, as if they've witnessed a holy act. By afternoon, the effects begin again. a surge of false vitality that makes him feel both invincible and unhinged. His speech quickens, his humor returns, loud and biting. He calls for his musicians, demands a game of cards, insists on entertaining the French ambassador. It's as though the mercury burns through his veins like divine fire. But then by dusk, the energy drains as quickly as it came. His legs ache, his vision flickers, his laughter collapses into coughing. The mask slips again. You can almost hear the king's thoughts as he stares once more into the mirror that evening. The shifting expression between amusement and horror. He's fascinated by what's happening to him, in the way only a man obsessed with life could be. His own body is a study in transformation. The alchemist spoke of purification through pain, of matter made perfect through suffering. Perhaps, he wonders, this is what they meant. The room grows colder as night falls. A single candle burns near the mirror, its flame shaking with every draught. The reflection of the king flickers too, as though it were made of smoke. For a long while he sits there just watching himself fade in and out of existence. Somewhere deep in the palace, the clock strikes 10. A memory rises. One of his childhood, before the wars, before the crown, when he watched his father being led away to the scaffold. He remembers the sound of the axe, the silence that followed. He was 12 then. And now, as he watches his own reflection tremble, he realizes he's been preparing for this same silence his entire life. Only this time the blade is slow, invisible, and chemical. There's something deeply lonely about the way kings die, surrounded by doctors, courtiers, priests, all of them orbiting his suffering like planets around a dying sun. And yet he's utterly alone. Every word spoken to him is wrapped in flattery or fear. Every promise of recovery is a lie told with good manners. Still, Charles smiles. That's what people always say about him. That even at his worst he smiles. The kind of smile that makes you want to believe he's all right. That the trembling in his hand is just fatigue. That the strange shine in his eyes is not fever but wit. But the mirror doesn't believe it. The mirror knows. Late in the evening, when everyone else has left, he calls for one of his younger servants, a quiet boy named William, who has never learned the art of courtly deception. William helps him remove the heavy velvet robe and hands him a simple linen shirt. For a brief moment, Charles looks less like a king and more like a weary scholar, his thin frame outlined by candlelight. "Tell me honestly," he says, "how do I look?" The boy hesitates, eyes flickering toward the mirror before answering. "You look tired, Your Majesty." "Tired?" Charles repeats softly. "Yes, that will do." He smiles again, but it's not his usual smile. It's smaller, more human, almost tender. When William leaves, the king turns back to the mirror for the last time that night. The reflection stares back, silent and strange. In that moment, it's hard to say which version of him is more real, the living man or the image of him already fading. The candlelight bends and wavers, the mercury in the glass shimmering faintly like a pool of liquid thought. And just for a heartbeat, you could swear the mirror breathes. It's not imagination. Not exactly. In the alchemical tradition, mirrors made with mercury were thought to contain the soul's echo. A perfect reflection could trap a piece of the spirit. The philosophers of the court whisper that the king's vitality is being stolen by his own curiosity, that every glance in the mirror feeds it, takes one more shimmer of his life for itself. But Charles, ever the skeptic, doesn't fear it. If anything, he finds it poetic. He leans close, places one trembling hand against the cool glass, and whispers, "If you outlive me, tell them what you saw." When the candle gutters out, the room returns to shadow. The mirror keeps the last light, a faint silver glow, like breath on cold glass, before it too fades into the dark. Outside, the Thames drifts slow and black, carrying the city's reflection away in ripples. Somewhere in the fog, a church bell tolls for no one in particular. And in Whitehall Palace, a king dreams of his own reflection walking through the halls long after his body has turned to dust. By morning, Whitehall smells of roses. Not fresh ones, not the kind that bloom from gardens, but that artificial sweetness that clings to the powdered wigs and perfumed gloves of the aristocracy. It's the smell of rot pretending to be refinement, the scent of a world trying to cover its own decay. You move through the galleries where courtiers laugh too loudly and whisper too quietly, their voices echoing under painted ceilings depicting gods who never get sick. The king's illness has become the unspoken pulse of the palace, and like everything in court life, it is performed, hidden in plain sight beneath satin and ceremony. Charles makes an appearance that morning. He insists on it. The corridors fill with rustling silk, the clicking of heels, the soft thunder of gossip disguised as admiration. His physicians have dressed him carefully, layering him in silver and black, hoping to disguise the thinness of his frame. He walks slower now, leaning slightly on a cane disguised as a fashion statement. The courtiers bow as he passes, each one timing their movements like dancers, their eyes darting up just long enough to confirm the rumors. They can see it. The trembling hands, the ashen skin, the faint stain at the edge of his collar, where another nosebleed has betrayed him. But none of them speak. In Whitehall, truth is considered vulgar. The palace itself feels complicit in the lie. The chandeliers drip with waxen light, the tapestries shimmer with gold thread, the marble floors gleam like frozen rivers. But beneath all that polish you can sense the mildew, the damp, the quiet corruption. London's air seeps in through every crack in the windows, thick with coal smoke and human breath. Somewhere below, in the kitchens, servants sweat and argue, scraping burnt sauce from pans that will soon feed the nobility upstairs. The entire court is a machine built on illusion, beauty paid for with exhaustion, laughter hiding the sound of coughing behind closed doors. You watch the king take his seat at breakfast, surrounded by silver platters and fresh fruit imported from warmer lands. The meal is arranged to suggest health, oranges for colour, meat for strength, pastries for indulgence. Charles eats slowly, as though chewing through fog. Across the table, the Duke of York, his brother, his heir, his quiet rival, watches every movement with the intensity of a vulture waiting for a stumble. Their conversations have grown strained. The Duke's Catholic sympathies have already made him unpopular, and the king's illness only sharpens the question that no one dares to ask aloud. What happens when the laughter dies with him? The courtiers sense it too. They hover around the brothers like moths around two candles, uncertain which one will still be burning tomorrow. The talk turns to theatre, to the latest scandal from the playhouses, to anything that doesn't involve medicine or mortality. But even their jokes sound rehearsed, brittle around the edges. The laughter echoes strangely, like something borrowed from a happier time. Later that afternoon, the royal barber enters to tend to the king. He works in silence, powdering the royal wig, trimming the beard, smoothing the pale skin with a brush dipped in lead-based cosmetics. It's almost comical, a monarch being embalmed while still alive. You can see it in the reflection of the mirror, a face caught between beauty and death, a portrait that requires constant retouching. The powder hides the tremors, the rouge hides the fever, and the perfume hides the slow chemical death unfolding beneath the skin. Every sense is assaulted by contradiction. You hear music drifting from another room, a harpsichord playing a lively tune, while a physician quietly measures the king's pulse. You smell rosewater and vinegar, and sickness mingling into something indistinguishable. You see courtiers bowing too deeply, pretending not to notice the king's sudden need to steady himself on the edge of the table. It's theatre in its purest form, a performance for an audience that already knows how the story ends. As evening falls, the air in the palace grows heavier, perfumed by 1,000 candles. The court gathers for supper, the grand performance of civility. The laughter is louder now, almost desperate. There's something about sickness that makes healthy people behave as though they can outrun it through conversation. The women fan themselves with gloved hands, their cheeks glowing with rouge, while the men discuss the latest invention from the Royal Society. A barometer that predicts the weather, a clock that keeps perfect time, a new recipe for gunpowder. Progress hums through their words, and yet here, sitting among them, the king's body is proof that all progress ends in failure. When the meal ends, Charles excuses himself. He makes it only halfway down the corridor before his strength gives way. A servant catches him, and for a moment everything freezes. The courtiers pretend not to see. The musicians keep playing. The masks remain firmly in place. The king is helped to his chambers, the incident already being rewritten in whispers. A touch of dizziness, perhaps too much wine. He laughed himself faint. But inside the bedchamber, the truth is quieter and crueler. The mercury tremors have spread to his jaw. His speech is slightly slurred. His pulse jumps and stutters like a misfiring engine. The physicians rush in, each one offering a different theory, a different vial, a different way to postpone the inevitable. They bleed him again until the basin darkens. They apply leeches to his temples. They burn sage to cleanse the air, and through it all, Charles remains calm, eerily calm. He cracks jokes between fits of pain, his humour now a weapon against panic. "I begin to suspect," he murmurs, "that death is simply another court appointment I have been slow to attend." Outside the chamber, the corridors hum with whispers. Some courtiers pray, others send quiet letters to friends, calculating how best to survive a change of reign. The perfume of the palace grows thicker, sweeter, suffocating. Roses, musk, incense, decay. And you realize that this is how power ends, not with rebellion or thunder or divine punishment, but with everyone pretending not to smell the rot. Hours later, when the servants clear the chamber and the candles are snuffed out, only the faint scent of rosewater lingers. The king sleeps uneasily, dreaming of gardens he once walked through as a boy, where the air was clean and the flowers didn't have to hide the smell of dying things. Outside the palace walls, London is a living organism, vast, restless, wheezing through the fog of its own progress. You step into the streets and it hits you at once. The mix of smoke, sweat, and tallow, the smell of roasted chestnuts tangled with sewage, the faint sweetness of dying flowers at market stalls. This is the kingdom Charles has resurrected, a city that survived fire, plague, and Puritan gloom, now reinvented as a theatre of appetite. Everything here can be bought, sold, or swallowed. Apothecaries line the crooked streets like shrines to hope. Their wooden signs creak in the wind, painted serpents, golden suns, pestles and mortars glinting with flakes of brass. Through the windows you can see shelves upon shelves of jars, dried beetles, powdered bones, desiccated herbs, and mysterious dark liquids that catch the candlelight like bottled night. The clerks move like priests, their fingers stained with ink and residue from whatever tincture they last mixed. Each promises miracle cures to men who cannot afford prayers, and to women who've lost faith in both. Cure for melancholy. Elixir of long life, powder against the stone, drops for forgetfulness. The same phrases echo through every shop like scripture rewritten for the desperate. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the city's pulse in these exchanges. The clinking of coins, the murmur of transactions, the quiet sighs of people who want, just once, to feel better. They don't trust the doctors. Those men serve the rich, the titled, the half-dead nobles who can pay in gold. But here in the shadowed lanes of Cheapside and Fleet Street, healing belongs to anyone with a penny and a little faith. There's irony in that. While the king lies upstairs breathing mercury, the common folk are swallowing lead and arsenic in the name of renewal. They sip laudanum to forget grief, inhale camphor for courage, chew tobacco for virtue, and rub goose fat into their chests for purity. Every cure is also a poison, but that's the charm of the age. They believe the body can be balanced through harm. That pain itself is medicinal if properly measured. You walk past a woman selling Hungarian water, a concoction of rosemary and spirits said to restore youth. She swears it kept the Queen of Hungary beautiful past 60, and she says it with such confidence that for a moment you almost believe her. Nearby, a blind man hawks miracle pills made of opium and gold dust. Children chase after him, laughing, unaware that the same mixture will kill their elders in slow, polite increments. Medicine has become performance now, half chemistry, half theatre. Apothecaries display coloured glass bottles in their windows like jewels, each one glowing under candlelight. They compete with their neighbours by claiming their tonics are blessed by monks or imported from Persia. The truth is, most of it comes from the same grimy back rooms, stirred in the same cracked bowls by the same trembling hands. And yet, there's something beautiful about it too. The faith of it, the idea that no matter how much the body fails, someone, somewhere can mix the right combination of substances and make you whole again. Maybe that's what Charles believes too. Maybe that's why the royal chambers smell more like an apothecary every day. Inside Whitehall, the king's physicians are not so different from the shopkeepers in Fleet Street. They too are merchants of hope. Only their currency is reputation. You can see it in the way they hover around the king's bed, arguing softly about the next treatment, quoting Galen and Paracelsus like rival priests. One insists on bleeding him again. Another prescribes a tonic of crushed pearls and spirits of hartshorn. The third, more daring, proposes a purgative so strong it could empty the soul itself. The king listens with half a smile. He knows that none of them truly understand what's happening inside him. He's a man of the new age, skeptical, curious, dangerously educated. He believes that truth is a puzzle to be solved, even if the solving of it destroys him. Perhaps that's why he keeps allowing them to try. He's not just fighting death, he's studying it. When evening comes, the city's rhythm changes. Candles bloom in the taverns. The laughter turns rougher, and the same apothecaries that sell healing by day now sell oblivion by night. Laudanum bottles clink under cloaks. Powdered poppy wine is traded between sailors and scholars alike. Somewhere in the docks a man swallows a handful of sleeping pearls and never wakes. And yet, for all the poison flowing through London's veins, there's life here, vivid, unruly life. Street performers juggle fire near the river. Lovers walk beneath the bridges, their footsteps echoing against damp stone. Somewhere a poet scribbles by candlelight, turning the chaos into verses about beauty and decay. This is the London Charles loves. Flawed, feverish, defiant. You can almost understand him now. To rule this city, to embody it, means to share its contradictions, to be alive and dying at once. His own body mirrors the metropolis. Brilliant, diseased, resilient, corrupt. The alchemy of kingship is not so different from the alchemy of medicine. Both pretend to control what no one truly can. Back in the palace, the physicians have lit extra candles. The king lies awake, listening to the city beyond the windows. He can hear the faint roar of the crowd from the taverns, the hooves on the cobblestones, the distant river whispering against its banks. The sounds comfort him. He doesn't want silence. Silence feels too much like the end. He reaches for a quill, his hand unsteady, and writes a single line in his notebook. Manset's desire for healing is his truest sickness. He pauses, stares at it, and then adds another. But I am no wiser for knowing this. The candlelight flickers across the page, turning the wet ink into tiny pools of silver. Outside, London breathes and shivers beneath its smoky veil. And in the centre of it all, one man lies awake in his perfumed chamber, listening to the pulse of a city that reflects him too well. Brilliant, poisonous, beautiful, and dying by its own inventions. By now you can feel it. The weight that presses down on Whitehall is not just the weight of a sick man's body, but the strain of an empire learning that even its heart can falter. Charles the Sextor's illness has become a metaphor in whispered tones. The body of the king as the body of England, once robust, now trembling from excess and exhaustion. You can almost hear the pulse of the realm slowing to match his own. It begins subtly, in letters exchanged between ministers, in cautious lines inked with phrases like His Majesty's vigour somewhat diminished. But the meaning is clear. Power is leaking. And like any wound in the flesh, the kingdom can smell it. The courtiers grow nervous. The ambassadors become bold. Even the gossip of the city shifts tone, from celebration to speculation. The king, for his part, insists on ruling as though nothing is wrong. You see him now in the council chamber, his presence still commanding even as his hands tremble slightly on the arm of his chair. The chandeliers above him drip light like melted gold. Maps of the world are spread before him, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Indian coast, each line drawn by men who never stopped believing that England's reach was eternal. His advisers drone on about trade and colonies, about the flow of silver and sugar and human lives across the sea. But Charles hears something else, the distant sound of waves, the echo of men coughing in ships' holds, the faint rhythm of oars striking dark water. The empire feels vast when seen on parchment, but in his imagination it's fragile, a trembling network of fevered men and wooden planks. The same sickness that eats at his flesh seems to spread through every distant outpost, every colony carved out in haste and pride. He presses his palm to the table and feels the tremor ripple through him. "Gentlemen," he says, voice steady but brittle, "a nation must have health to stand upright. We mustn't mistake motion for strength." They nod, not quite understanding. They never do. Outside, the Thames moves sluggishly, thick with refuse and light. The ships anchored there seem almost motionless, their masts jutting through the fog like ribs. On the far bank, new warehouses rise, bricks, mortar, ambition. London grows even as its monarch withers. Progress does not wait for kings. That evening, when the courtiers disperse, Charles retreats once more to his private chambers. The air is sharp with vinegar, the physician's latest attempt to purify the atmosphere. He sits by the window, gazing toward the river, a cloak wrapped around his thinning frame. The sound of the tide has always comforted him. It reminds him of exile, of the years spent wandering the coasts of Europe, dreaming of reclaiming his crown. Those were lean years, humiliating years, but they were honest. He knew who he was then, a man surviving by wit and charm. Now, surrounded by doctors and flatterers, he's not sure anymore. You can sense his loneliness. The courtiers fear him too much to speak plainly. His mistresses, once devoted, visit less often, whispering about contagion. His brother hovers at the edge of every room, waiting and praying at the same time. Even the dogs, his faithful spaniels, keep their distance when the smell of mercury grows too strong. He studies his own reflection again in the window pane, a faint, ghostly outline superimposed over the river. The candlelight behind him flickers, and for a moment it looks as though the water itself is flowing through him. The king sighs. An empire, he murmurs, is only as sound as the bones that bear it. You think about that, about how every great power begins as a body born, grown, fed, and finally consumed by its own appetite. England in the 17th century is ravenous. It feeds on sugar, tobacco, gold, flesh, and every bite comes back poisoned. The Caribbean plantations hum with labor. The African coast is scarred by trade, and yet the same poison that sustains the empire is slowly seeping into its heart. The king is both cause and symbol of that corruption. At night his dreams are fevered. He sees ships turning to bone, sailors coughing silver, the Thames rising to swallow the city whole. He wakes gasping, his sheets damp with sweat, his skin cold to the touch. The physicians rush in with their candles and instruments, muttering about vapors of the brain. They bleed him again, because it's all they know how to do. The bowl fills dark and quick. One doctor studies it and declares the king's blood too thick. Another insists it's too pale. The king laughs weakly. It cannot be both, he says, but they don't laugh. He's not just their patient, he's their experiment, their prestige, their nightmare. And still, London hums outside. The city never stops. The hammering, the bells, the cries of merchants, the prayers of beggars. To them, the king's illness is gossip, nothing more. They speak of him the way they'd speak of a storm offshore, with curiosity, not concern. He's distant now, as unreachable as the stars. You stand at his bedside that night. The curtains sway slightly in the draught. The candlelight paints his face in soft gold and shadow, each line etched deeper than before. His breathing is uneven, a rhythm of defiance and surrender. You can almost hear the machinery of empire grinding faintly behind it, the endless ticking of clocks, the scratching of quills, the counting of prophets that never sleep. Charles whispers something, barely audible. You lean closer. They think the body of the king is divine, he says, eyes half closed. But divinity bleeds like any other man. He smiles faintly. The difference, perhaps, is that the king must bleed for everyone. In that moment, the words feel like confession and prophecy both. The crown is a crucible. The body, a vessel. The empire, a sickness that spreads through both. The fire dies down. The scent of burning herbs drifts through the chamber. Somewhere in the distance, the palace bells toll the hour, slow, solemn, precise. And as the last echo fades, you understand, the king's body isn't failing the empire. The empire is simply reflecting its king, brilliant, decaying, full of promise and poison in equal measure. The end, when it comes, doesn't arrive with thunder or revelation. It comes quietly, like a slow eclipse, the light dimming in increments too subtle for the courtiers to notice until it's nearly gone. You're there in Whitehall, in that heavy February air of 1685, when time itself seems to move slower around the royal bed. The room is thick with candle smoke and murmured Latin. Servants move like shadows, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Every breath from the king sounds like an argument between the body and the will. It begins with a seizure. One moment, Charles is sitting upright, talking faintly about ships on the Thames. The next, his eyes roll upward, and his hands seize the bedclothes. The courtiers freeze. A goblet falls. A dog begins to bark. Then chaos, servants shouting for physicians, for bandages, for prayers. They pour into the chamber as though summoned by instinct, each carrying a vial or a remedy like a weapon against death. You can smell it before you see it. The tang of metal, the sour sting of vinegar, the faint sweetness of burning herbs. It's a theatre of medicine now, a final act performed by men who have already lost the plot. One calls for a bleeding bowl. Another demands that the king be cupped along his spine. They argue in whispers, terrified that their disagreement might offend God, or worse, the Duke of York. They cut him. The blood flows dark and thick. They bleed him again and again. The basin fills and empties, 30 ounces, then 40, then more. His lips lose colour. His breath comes shallow. Still they continue. One doctor mutters that the evil humours must be purged entirely. Another insists the pulse is steadying. They don't see the truth. The pulse has simply grown too faint to measure. A priest enters quietly, his cassock brushing the stone floor. The courtiers part as though for an angel. In his hand he holds the holy oil. He begins to pray, voice trembling. The Latin words mix with the doctor's frantic English. A blur of faith and science, of incense and mercury. The smell of sanctity and medicine clash in the air like two worlds colliding. Charles opens his eyes for a moment. Do you see something strange there? Not fear, not exactly, but wariness. Like a man watching a play he's already seen too many times. He tries to speak, but the words catch. The priest leans close. The king's voice is hoarse, faint. I am sorry, gentlemen, for being such an unconscionable time in dying. The room freezes. Then a laugh, a soft, broken laugh. The last trace of the merry monarch flickering through. Even now, he makes death sound like a minor inconvenience. They give him more tonics. They place hot coals at his feet. They press smelling salts to his nose. One doctor orders a blistering poultice placed on his chest, another on his legs. The skin blisters, peels, and still they work, convinced that pain is proof of progress. They force a draught of ammonia between his lips. He chokes, coughs, then sighs, as though surrendering not to death but to exhaustion. The Duke of York kneels beside the bed. His face is pale and slick with sweat. He murmurs something you can't hear, a confession maybe, or a prayer for mercy. For years these two brothers have danced around religion like cats circling a flame, one Protestant, one Catholic, both trapped between faith and politics. But now theology feels small. Whatever divides them has dissolved in the face of what no man can argue with. The candles gutter. The room seems to shrink around the bed, as though the palace itself is holding its breath. Outside, the bells of Westminster toll faintly through the fog. Somewhere beyond the river, the city is unaware that history is pausing. Life goes on, markets open, bread is baked, carriages rattle on cobblestones. But here in this room, time is soft and slow and heavy. The king's breathing changes. Each exhale stretches longer than the last. The physicians whisper their observations like clerks of an autopsy. Pulse diminished, lips blue, perspiration cold. They talk as though naming the symptoms might reverse them. One of them tries to open his eyes wider with a thumb, muttering about ocular response. Another measures the temperature of his skin with the back of his hand, and then crosses himself. You notice the small details. The dog curled at the foot of the bed, whining softly, the clock ticking above the fireplace. The faint reflection of the candles trembling in the polished silver basin beside him. Everything feels too still, too composed, as though even the inanimate objects are afraid to move. At the foot of the bed, the Queen kneels, Catherine of Braganza, veiled and silent, her tears leaving pale trails through her powder. She's been scorned, mocked, betrayed, but at this moment none of that matters. Her hands clutch the sheet, her lips move without sound. You can almost hear the rhythm of her thoughts. Please, just one more breath. And then he gives it. One last exhale, long and thin, escaping like smoke. A soft sigh, the sound of something invisible unfastening. The physicians lean close. One of them says, "It is done." No one moves for a moment. The air feels thicker, like it has forgotten how to flow. The priest begins another prayer, this one softer, final. The Duke of York covers his face. A servant blows out one candle by mistake, and the tiny wisp of smoke curls upward like a departing spirit. Outside the window, the sun breaks through the fog for the first time that day. It spills across the river, pale and cold, like a blessing and a warning. The empire will continue, but the man who embodied its contradiction, its joy and its decay, has gone. You stand there, watching the stillness settle. The body that once ruled kingdoms now looks small, almost fragile, as if the weight of the crown had hollowed it out from within. Around the bed, the courtiers bow their heads, not in prayer, not really, but in habit. They've bowed to this man every day of their lives. It's all they know how to do. And in the silence that follows, something shifts. It's not grief exactly. It's the strange relief that comes when inevitability finally arrives. The rot that perfumed the palace can no longer be hidden. The performance is over. The curtain has fallen. Somewhere in the distance, another bell begins to toll. The slow, deliberate rhythm reserved for kings. Each note stretches across the city, across the river, across the hearts of those who loved and despised him alike. And as it echoes through the fog, the last image you're left with is simple. A crown resting on a bedside table, glinting faintly in the candlelight, while the hand that once wore it lies still beside it, pale, open, human. Morning comes grey and damp, the sort of London morning where even the light feels tired. The air outside Whitehall tastes of smoke and fog, but inside, the corridors are hushed with that strange ritual silence that follows a royal death. Curtains are drawn, servants whisper. The court physicians, pale and sleep-deprived, huddle in a small chamber beside the royal bedchamber, quills scratching nervously over parchment. The King of England lies cold and still in his linen shroud, and already the business of dissection has begun. You step into the room, and for a moment it's hard to believe this is the same chamber that glittered with music and laughter just days ago. The candles have been replaced, the drapes tied back, and at the center of it all lies the table, plain wood, draped in white. On it rests the king's body, the crown of his head turned slightly toward the window, as though he might still be watching the river he loved. His skin has lost that feverish sheen of mercury, replaced now by a strange, dull glow. The air smells of camphor, myrrh, and metal. The physicians stand in a semicircle around him, their expressions carefully blank. They are not merely doctors now. They are witnesses, historians, confessors to the body of a god made flesh and unmade again. The surgeon's hands tremble as he unfolds his instruments. A scalpel, a bone saw, a thin silver probe. Someone mutters a prayer. Another clears his throat and reads from the king's own orders, his command that in death as in life the mysteries of nature should be studied and understood. And so they begin. The first incision is slow, almost reverent. The blade glides across the pale skin, parting it like parchment. The sound it makes is quiet but unmistakable, a wet whisper, the faintest sigh of surrender. The assistants lean closer, their quills ready. Blood unusually blackened, one notes. Odor, sharp, metallic. They exchange glances. They know what they're looking for, though none will dare say it outright. Proof of the poisons, the tinctures, the experiments, proof that curiosity killed the king. When they open the abdomen, a thick vapor rises, sour, chemical, oddly perfumed. The surgeon recoils slightly, then presses on. The organs inside are discolored, strangely heavy. The liver glistens with a faint, silvery sheen. The stomach, when opened, releases a smell of vinegar and decay. His body, one whispers, has been turned to pharmacy. Another nods grimly. A vessel of his own experiments. You can almost see it. The alchemical irony of it all. The man who dreamed of turning base metals into gold had instead transformed himself into an alloy of mercury and flesh, a living crucible, a monarch who sought purity through chemistry and found corruption instead. They move to the head. The surgeon wipes his hands on a cloth already darkened with stains. The scalp has peeled back, the skull opened with methodical precision. Inside, the brain glistens under candlelight, pale and gelatinous, veined like marble. One physician murmurs that it appears remarkably sound. Another writes, "The royal intellect, undiminished in structure." It's almost poetic, in a macabre way that even in decay they want to believe the mind of the king remains unspoiled. And yet, the rest of him tells another story. The lungs show traces of chronic inflammation. The kidneys are swollen and soft. The intestines, when examined, bear the unmistakable markings of heavy metal poisoning. One of the doctors, the youngest, cannot help himself. This, he says quietly, is not the work of nature. His superior silences him with a glare. No, the older man replies, it is the work of medicine. Outside the door the courtiers wait. Some pace the hall, others kneel in forced prayer. They pretend not to hear the sounds from within, the scrape of saw against bone, the wet slap of organs placed into basins. For all their elegance, their powdered wigs and their silken gloves, they know what is happening to their king. They know this is how power ends, dissected, labelled, archived. When it's over, the surgeons wash their hands in a basin of rosewater. The scent cannot hide the truth. The body has been mapped, measured, and made meaningless. The organs are weighed and recorded. The heart is placed in a separate vessel, sealed with wax, labelled Cor Regis, the heart of the king. It will be buried apart from him, because even now they cannot let him rest entirely whole. As they sew the body shut, the youngest doctor lingers, staring at the strange silver sheen that clings to the king's veins. He dips a cloth in wine and rubs at it. but it doesn't fade. It gleams faintly, even under the dull grey light. He looks up at his superior, uncertain. "What do we tell them?" he asks. The older man hesitates, then writes carefully in the record. The cause of death, apoplexy, brought on by strain of labour and years of study. It's a lie, of course, but a polite one. Later, when the body is prepared for viewing, the physicians step back and look at their work. The face has been powdered, the lips painted slightly red. The royal insignia rests on the chest. To the untrained eye, he looks almost peaceful, almost human again. But you know what lies beneath. The layers of corruption, the traces of mercury glittering faintly like coins in the dark. As the door opens and the courtiers file in, the air changes. The murmurs return. Some cross themselves. Others whisper praise. None mention the faint, metallic smell that lingers no matter how much incense they burn. For a moment, sunlight breaks through the window and touches the dead man's face. It glints off the faint sheen around his temples, a ghostly reflection of the metal that consumed him. To the priests, it looks like a halo. To the doctors, like evidence. To you, it looks like truth. The autopsy of Majesty is over. The secrets of his body have been written down, sealed in archives, and left to gather dust. But even now, centuries later, you can still feel that faint shimmer when you speak his name. The merry monarch, the philosopher king, the man who turned himself into an experiment still gleaming faintly beneath the surface of history. The day of the funeral begins with fog, thick, London fog, the kind that eats sound and softens light, turning the world into something half real and half dream. You wake to it pressing against the palace windows, moving slow and heavy like breath against glass. Outside, the bells of Westminster begin their long toll, the deep bronze sound rolling through the streets in slow, patient waves. Every shopkeeper, every beggar, every soldier knows what it means. The king is dead. You follow the procession as it forms, not with fanfare, but with precision. The royal coffin lies at the centre of it all, draped in black velvet and embroidered with gold thread, so fine it seems to shimmer when the torches pass. The smell of beeswax candles and damp wool fills the morning air. The crowd gathers in silence, thousands of faces, pale and unreadable in the mist. There's something strange about it, this quiet reverence for a man who spent so much of his reign defying solemnity. The coffin itself is a masterpiece, carved oak, lined with lead, heavy enough that 6 men strain to lift it. Inside lies the body that was once Charles II, embalmed, perfumed, and wrapped so tightly in linen that it hardly seems human. Beneath those layers you imagine the strange silver shimmer of mercury still clinging to the veins, turning the king's corpse into something between man and metal. The alchemists would have called it transmutation. The court physicians would have called it unfortunate. The procession moves slowly through the courtyard. The trumpets are muted, their sound swallowed by the fog. Soldiers march in rhythm, their boots thudding softly on wet cobblestones. Behind them trail the nobles, cloaked, powdered, perfumed, their expressions carved into masks of grief. They whisper the language of succession, of policy, of power. The dead king has barely cooled, and already the machinery of rule is spinning again. You watch as the new monarch, James, Duke of York, walks at the front, his face unreadable. His brother's crown waits for him, heavy with consequence. You can feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of religion, of expectation, of unspoken dread. The people bow as he passes, but you can sense the fracture underneath. The age of easy laughter has ended. What comes next will not be merry. The cortege wins its way through the narrow streets toward Westminster Abbey. The air grows colder, the fog thickens, the torches flicker and die one by one, until only the candlelight from the abbey windows guides the way. When you enter, the space seems impossibly vast, arches disappearing into shadow, incense drifting like smoke from another world. The organ groans, ancient and slow, its notes vibrating in the bones of the floor. The coffin is placed upon a raised platform at the centre of the nave. Around it stand bishops in gold vestments, their faces glowing dimly in the candlelight. Their prayers echo in Latin, a language that no one really understands anymore, but everyone feels the weight of. It's less about meaning than about sound, the sound of finality, of ritual, of history sealing itself shut. You move closer. The air near the coffin smells faintly of roses and metal, the residue of embalming oils mixed with the unmistakable trace of mercury that refuses to leave. The courtiers breathe through handkerchiefs, pretending not to notice. Even now, the king is teaching them something, that beauty and decay are inseparable, that every crown comes with its own slow poison. As the priest speaks, the words ripple through the chamber. Requiem aeternam dona I, Domini, eternal rest grant unto him. O Lord, but you can't help thinking that rest was never something Charles truly desired. He was too restless, too curious, too hungry for sensation. Even in death, his story feels unfinished, like an experiment interrupted. You look around. The faces in the crowd blur together in the flickering candlelight. Some weep quietly, others watch with the calculated stillness of politicians. A few, you suspect, are already thinking about dinner. It's the eternal paradox of monarchy, the grandeur of ceremony masking the indifference beneath. When the coffin is finally lowered into the vault, the sound of chains echoes up through the abbey like a groan. The ropes strain, dust falls from the rafters, and then, with a dull, resonant thud, the lid meets the stone. For a moment everything stops. The prayers, the organ, the breath of the congregation. It's as if the city itself pauses to listen. Then the priest raises his hands and the final words are spoken. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The echo rolls through the vault like thunder in miniature. You can almost feel it settling into the walls, a whisper that will never quite fade. Afterward, when the crowd disperses, the abbey remains dimly lit. The candles burn low, their flames bowing in the draught. The air is thick with incense, the kind that clings to your clothes and follows you for hours. You linger by the tomb. The name is already engraved into the marble. Charles Rex, simple, elegant, final, beneath it. A Latin inscription promises eternal glory, but you can't help thinking of the autopsy table, of silver veins and blackened blood. Glory is a story told by those who never saw the inside of the body. Outside, London moves again. The taverns reopen. The bells stop. The fog thins. Somewhere across the river, fireworks crackle faintly. A new reign beginning. Life, as always, marches forward. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint rhythm of the funeral drums in the distance, echoing through the streets like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. The city has buried its king, yes, but it has not buried what he represents. The pursuit of knowledge without mercy, the hunger for beauty that consumes its host, the empire's strange glittering sickness. You walk away from the abbey. The air smells of rain and coal. A new dawn bleeds through the fog, thin, grey and indifferent. You can almost hear his voice still, dry and amused. Sorry, gentlemen, for being such an unconscionable time in dying. And somewhere beneath the stones of Westminster, the man who turned himself into Mercury sleeps. Not quite saint, not quite sinner, a monarch transmuted into myth, his laughter lingering faintly in the fog that never really leaves London. Weeks pass, and the world begins to rearrange itself around the absence. Mourning turns into etiquette, grief into gossip, and the palace, always hungry for relevance, feeds on new dramas. The draperies are changed, the portraits taken down, and courtiers whisper the same two words over and over. The new reign. Life is always so quick to replace the dead. But for now you walk the corridors of Whitehall and the air still smells faintly of camphor and old roses. Somewhere beneath the marble floors the last remnants of his body still lie, sealed in lead and shadow. You pause in the gallery where Charles once stood. hands clasped behind his back, studying the portraits of his mistresses as though they were chapters of scripture. The sunlight through the tall windows still falls across the same floorboards he paced for decades. The same dust motes dance through the air. You can almost hear the laughter again, the soft, irreverent tone that used to fill this place like perfume. But it's thinner now, like a memory that's been touched too often. Outside, the city refuses to mourn properly. The streets are muddy, the air thick with the smell of fish and smoke, but life goes on. Tavern songs mention the merry monarch between toasts, pamphleteers sell caricatures of his mistresses, while poets write verses about the Silver King. The people have always been divided about him, half adoration, half accusation. To some he was England's resurrection after Cromwell's grey Puritan years, to others a man who turned monarchy into theatre. But in the end, everyone agrees on one thing: no one will ever reign quite like him again. Across the channel, ambassadors whisper of strange things. They say the late king's private library has been sealed, its shelves lined with alchemical manuscripts, instruments, and jars of metallic powder labelled in his own hand. Some claim he kept a furnace in the basement of Whitehall, where he mixed his own medicines under the supervision of his apothecaries. Others say he believed mercury was not just medicine but revelation, a key to the body's divine mechanism. He had told them, if the soul is trapped in the flesh, then chemistry is the study of the soul's cage. It's easy now to romanticize him. History always forgives beauty before it forgives truth. The portraits show him with calm eyes and soft curls, the perfect image of composure. You'd never know about the tremors in his hands during his final months, or how the doctors hid his failing sight, or how the mercury ate away at his nerves. The records are sanitized, the official cause written in a neat Latin phrase, apoplexia subita, sudden apoplexy, as if the human body could be summarized with such brevity. And yet, beneath the official version, a quieter story lingers, one told not by courtiers or priests, but by the servants, the ones who cleaned the glasses, boiled the instruments, burned the sheets. They whisper that his skin glowed faintly in candlelight toward the end, that the stains on his pillow were not blood but silver, that the king himself had known what he was doing, that he was chasing something no physician could explain, maybe not immortality, but illumination, a way to understand the boundary between body and spirit by destroying it. You wander through his old chambers, now stripped bare. The scent of perfume and smoke still clings to the tapestries. On a writing desk, abandoned in haste, lies a fragment of parchment. The ink is faded, but the words are clear enough to read. In all things, seek transformation. You trace the letters with your finger, imagining him writing it. Eyes alight with feverish curiosity, hand trembling slightly from the mercury in his veins. To him, everything was alchemy, love, power, faith, medicine, the art of turning pain into gold. Downstairs in the kitchens, the servants whisper that the new king has banned certain powders from the royal apothecary. The bottles marked Aqua Mercurialis have been locked away. The glass retorts have been smashed. But you know how these things go. Nothing truly disappears in a palace. Somewhere in a hidden cupboard or forgotten cellar, one of those bottles still sits, the metal inside glinting faintly under the dust, waiting for the next curious hand. As you step outside, the Thames moves sluggishly under the morning mist. The gulls circle lazily, their cries echoing against the stone walls. The river has seen everything: coronations, executions, fires, plagues, and it carries them all downstream without judgment. You lean against the balustrade, watching the water, and for a moment you imagine it silver, reflecting the ghost of the king who once stood here doing the same. He had loved this view, the river that flowed past his window like time itself. You think about the strange legacy he left behind. Not a monument, not a victory, but a question. What happens when curiosity becomes hunger? When science turns into self-destruction? He was not the first man to die for knowledge, and he won't be the last. But few ever did it with such style, such stubborn grace. Even his death feels like an experiment that went too far. The bells begin to toll again, softer this time, less a mourning than a memory. Their sound rolls through the fog like an old song. You close your eyes, and for a moment it's easy to imagine him walking beside you again, not as a king, but as a man, curious, flawed, restless. His laughter low and tired. His pockets full of half-finished notes about the soul, the stars, and the strange beauty of decay. The palace behind you is already changing. The tapestries will be replaced. The coins will bear a new face. The laughter of a new court will fill these halls, but somewhere in the thick mortar of these walls, his story remains, a faint shimmer of mercury that refuses to fade. You turn to leave, and as you do, the fog parts just enough to let the morning light spill across the Thames. The reflection shivers like liquid metal. It looks, for just a second, like the world itself is exhaling. And in that light, if you listen closely, you can almost hear him again. Soft, amused, immortal in his irony. Sorry, gentlemen, for being such an unconscionable time in dying. The bells fall silent. The river flows on. The kingdom forgets. But the story lingers like mercury in the bloodstream of history. And now, as the last echo of the bells fades and the fog folds itself back over London, you can feel the story loosening its grip. The city exhales. The candles burn low. The king is gone, and yet his ghost lingers in the quiet hum of the night. Not haunting, just present, like the faint metallic scent that clings to old coins or the glimmer left behind by a mirror long since tarnished. You can almost see him if you close your eyes, a man half in shadow, half in starlight, still studying the mysteries of his own undoing. The room you're in feels softer now, smaller. The hum of the outside world dims until it's little more than a murmur. You trace the shape of this story backward, from the cold slab of the autopsy table, to the glitter of the court, to the restless curiosity of a man who could not stop asking questions, even as his own body became the answer. There's something almost tender in it, isn't there? That hunger to know, to reach, to touch the edge of understanding even when it burns. You breathe in slowly. The air tastes like old wood and dust. You imagine the river beyond the palace walls still carrying reflections of the city through the night. All that history drifting beneath the bridges, silent and endless. The same water that touched the boats of plague victims, of kings, of lovers. The same tide that never learns but never stops. You feel the weight of the story settle into something gentler. The poison becomes perfume. The tragedy becomes lesson. Maybe that's all any history really is. The slow transformation of pain into meaning. Alchemy of memory. The kind that leaves you not afraid but quietly awake. So you let the image fade. The palace dissolves. The fog closes over the river. And in the soft stillness that remains, there's only the slow rhythm of your own breathing. Steady, patient, alive. The world will keep spinning. The candles will burn out. And somewhere beyond all of this, the restless king still dreams of gold. Sleep well, traveller. The night is long, and history never truly ends.